Welcome to another Liverpool.com podcast. I'm Dan Morgan. I'm going to be your host this week, and today I'm joined by Liverpool.com staff writer Mark Wakefield and Blood Reds Matt Addison. Gentlemen, hope you're both well today. Got quite a bit to get through, given the fact that it's the day after the night before in terms of Atalanta in the Champions League, Liverpool's 2-0 defeat at Anfield. But firstly, there's obviously some breaking news around the day in terms of the government's tiers being announced for the ending of the latest lockdown. And Matt, Liverpool have been placed in tier 2, which means that in a footballing sense, we will in theory be allowed 2,000 fans back into stadiums, which would include obviously Liverpool and Everton. So initially, it sounds like good news. It sounds like a step in the right direction, but I'm sure we'll come to it. There's seemingly, as ever with government rules, many flaws that we can point out. What's your initial thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, my initial thoughts, as you say, is it's a positive step forward. 2,000 is better than nothing. I think, obviously, we've waited so long to get people back in the ground, and I think even a small number will make a significant difference. Even if you're sat at home watching on TV, I think to just see that there are people in the stadium rather than it being completely empty, I think that will make a significant difference. But yeah, there are still a lot of questions to be asked. I think one of the first things that I thought was, if you've got 2,000 people in, is it not just going to cost the club even more money? I know that's not the prime sort of thing that you're thinking about. You're thinking about, yes, 2,000 people can come back, but is it financially viable for clubs to be doing that? I'm not too sure. I'm sure Liverpool would take the economic hit if it meant that some fans could come back in. But I think that is a question certainly for some clubs elsewhere. I think the other big issue is then, what happens with, who's allowed in, who's not allowed in. How do you pick the 2,000? I'm sure there's many more thousand than just the 2,000 who'd love to be inside Anfield. So yeah, the initial reaction is this is good. It's a positive step, but I think there are still a lot of questions that have to be answered before we really know where we stand on this.
Mark, you wrote a wake up on this the other day for the site, and I think you were very sort of right to raise the points that you raised, in that this isn't in context to each individual club. So if a side like you mentioned, Fleetwood, for example, holds 9,000 and they're in tier 2, then by virtue of the space that is in and around a stadium which is much more compact, the risk, if you like, is much greater because people are naturally going to be in closer contact, whereby Anfield has a stadium capacity, as we know, 54,000. So 2,000 within that space is a lot more manageable, you would say, in terms of distancing people and spreading people out. I mean, it made more sense, surely, to do this on a sort of percentage basis for each capacity stadium, did it not?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, basically, written word for word what I said in my piece, that how can it be right that, a stadium that holds 54,000 can be forced to hold the same amount of people as a stadium that has 5, 6, 7,000 in League One or League Two? It doesn't seem right. I mean, obviously, it's absolutely brilliant news that we can have fans back in the stadium. It's what we've all been craving for these past few months, and it is definitely a step in the right direction. But for me, it just doesn't seem like the right way to go about it. The decision that's been made has been made by people who aren't involved in football. I think that's part of the problem. It's been made on the government level. Obviously, safety of the people involved, fans, staff, players, backroom team, everyone that's at the ground has obviously got to take paramount priority, of course, and it always should do. But like you said, it should be, well, from a personal point of view, looking in, it should be based on the percentage of the stadium, whether that's 5%, 10%, 15%, whatever it is. That should be the way to go about it. And then you've got the other argument of teams being allowed fans in the league, and then other teams in the same league aren't. And that, again, is not a level playing field. I mean, Liverpool fans are going to have fans in, then Man United, Man City aren't. On the face of it, that's like an advantage to Liverpool, and to some extent it probably is. But it's not fair. It's got to be fair to every single club in every single league, and allowing fans in some grounds and not in others in the same league just isn't fair. you can see why they've done it. Obviously, some areas are going to be in tier 3, quite a lot of areas in tier 3, which means no fans. But yeah, it just doesn't seem right. When you actually look at it, obviously on the outside, fans are coming back in. That's great, but when you actually look at it, there's actually a lot more flaws to it than you probably would imagine.
I think that's sort of where my argument is, Matt, with this. To just jump on what Mark said and go off on my own sort of tangent, is that my argument would be that for me this has to be a process towards something. This has to be a step towards something tangible that eventually leads to supporters back in stadium. Now I know that with the health pandemic that's happening, with obviously the virus that is still not under control in this country and to be honest in the rest of the world, that is impossible to sort of make a conscious plan for in a realistic sense. However, I think what worries me is that we could get given this, by January it could all be taken away. So it's almost as if to say, well, what's the point of the enterprise here? To get fans back in stadium for a month? I don't really see this as being the first step towards Liverpool being back to full capacity in a year's time, whenever it is. The goalposts can change depending on the numbers of the virus and the infection rates.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit soon, doesn't it? It wasn't something that I was expecting to come out certainly until next year, given the way that it's been going for the last few months and that sort of thing. But I suppose the only thing that I can think of is that it's not really about a Liverpool or a Manchester City or whoever the top teams are. I think it's more about lower down the pyramid. You've got to allow fans back into stadiums to help those clubs survive and that sort of thing. And I suppose it wouldn't have been a good look if, for example, you mentioned Fleetwood before, if they were allowed a certain amount of fans back, you then have to offer that same thing to all clubs across the country. Obviously, safety measures being in there in terms of the tiered system and that sort of thing. So I think it's probably designed more for the smaller clubs than the bigger clubs in that regard. But yeah, you are right to point out that it's about that step forward, isn't it? Hopefully, the 2,000 is the start point. You then maybe jump up to 5,000 and 10,000, and over the months you sort of build it and get bigger and bigger and bigger. But yeah, I suppose the concern at this point is that winter is still a couple of months of being there. There's still various questions to be asked about the vaccine and that sort of thing, and you wonder maybe by January are we back at square one again. But yeah, I think we have to sort of take it as much of a positive as we can. It feels like a step forward right now, and hopefully that is still the case in a month or so's time.
Yeah, I mean, just finally, Mark, to accentuate the positives, I guess. I think, okay, it's 2,000 fans for Liverpool. It could have been none. Liverpool, we know we're very close to being in tier 3. They were the first city to go into tier 3. So we have to sort of look at December at least, Anfield having 2,000 supporters in, and what that means to this team. I think it means more to this team than any, really. Andy Robertson, Jurgen Klopp have all spoken about the fact that this stadium without fans does not feel right. And like Matt said before, just the concept of having the goal cheered by 2,000 people is going to be so much greater, so much better than none at all. And if that's all we have at the minute, then we take it, because we know how much having the fans there benefits this team. It's a two-way thing. It's something the Klopp's built, something he's emphasised since day one. So to even have 1% of that back, whatever it is better than nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've listed all the negatives or the flaws to it, but there is no doubt a lot of positives to it. Certainly from a Liverpool perspective, looking at it personally, it just breaks your heart to see Anfield empty, even with the away fans. The banter you can get with away fans sometimes. It just doesn't feel right it being empty. And yes, 2,000 in a 54,000 seater stadium is going to feel. Obviously, it's not going to feel perfect, but it's still going to be better than what it was with nobody there. And yeah, just something as simple as having a real crowd cheer for a goal going in, or a foul going against you or a decision or whatever it may be. Something like that is better than, the automated crowd cheers that we have on watching it on TV. So yeah, there are definite positives to it. We've obviously listed the flaws, and like you said, it does feel like it might just be a temporary thing for the next month to whatever it may be. But for now, at least for December, when Liverpool have got a handful of games at home, big games as well. We consider who they've got in that time: Spurs, Wolves as well, West Brom on Boxing Day. There's a lot of big games in there, as well as obviously they've got a Champions League game against Ajax. Whether that will be, I think that'll probably be a bit too soon actually for that. But yeah, certainly there's a lot of positives to come from it, even if there are a few negatives.
Okay, back to matters on the pitch. Last night, Liverpool fell to Atalanta at Anfield by 2-0. A result that, in many ways, was not surprising, Matt. I don't know whether it was to you, but a team that is, I wrote about it after the game, a team that is by necessity rather than choice, and a result that we've all probably feared, if we're being honest, over the last few weeks, has come to fruition. And that's not a dig at anyone on the pitch. It's literally a case of this manager having to juggle and gamble with so many things, and eventually a result like this is going to happen. And maybe you can argue with time, it's, again, the perfect time to get beat, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, you looked at the changes, and to be honest, I still thought Liverpool would have enough to at least get a point and at least perform better than what they did. I think obviously Jurgen Klopp has been very, very vocal, quite rightly, about the fixture schedule, quite rightly about the number of changes that he is going to have to make, because players are just not being taken care of at the moment with the amount that they're having to put in. The games are coming thick and fast, and I can understand why he made as many changes as what he did. I still thought though that the 11 Liverpool put out should have been enough to perform well above that level. I thought Salah and Mane were in that team. You expect for them to drag this team forward, for example, but Liverpool didn't end up having a shot on target in the entire game. They didn't perform well as a team. The players who came in didn't really quite work. I'm not quite sure what happened to the midfield area. We were talking about Jones and Wijnaldum over the weekend being brilliant, but then last night neither of them, it just didn't quite seem to click. So I take the point of obviously they've made changes, the fixture schedule is mad, and there have been fears that this could happen at some point. But for me, when I saw the team sheet, it wasn't an immediate sort of thing of, oh, Liverpool might lose here. I was still thinking, well, there should be enough in that 11 to do something, to get the job done. Even if it's only by the odd goal, they should still have performed a lot better than what they did, I thought.
Did you expect the team matches to come back to you? Did you expect sort of Salah and Mane in there? I mean, I have a theory around that. I think that personally, I think he tries to take pressure off the back line by putting Salah and Mane in the side. There's the muscle memory from what happened in Bergamo. Liverpool won 5-0 with those players in the pitch, and they were in scintillating form, as was Diogo Jota. But I wonder whether, Klopp's thought that if he gets them up the pitch, then Atalanta's line will drop. They won't be as sort of willing to come forward as they were. And you can sort of understand that to an extent. I think the one big miss for me is Robertson. And I think you're sort of seeing now a situation whereby this is a team that needs him in the side as much as it does Henderson in many senses. You look at Leicester as a comparison. Liverpool are able to get up the pitches as regularly as they are because Robertson's getting them up. And I think the midfield line, for example, sits on the defensive line a lot more last night from a tactical point of view. But with a player like him in the back line, he can get you up the pitch quicker, and you don't have those isolated forwards like we ended up seeing.
Yeah, it wasn't a surprise that a few changes were made. It was a surprise for me that Andy Robertson wasn't there. It was a surprise that it was Origi through the middle and not Minamino. There was a couple of bits that I didn't necessarily agree with, but to be honest, I didn't think Kostas Tsimikas did particularly poorly. I thought he was all right. He wasn't brilliant. He wasn't poor for me. He was just sort of average, considering it was sort of putting him in out of the blue, really. It was a performance that I thought you could probably have expected from him, but as much as there was a couple of different positions that maybe I would have done something different. Nico Williams, again, I thought he was all right. He wasn't dreadful. He wasn't brilliant. But I think for me, it would have made more sense to have Milner there against Atalanta and then have Nico Williams at the weekend against Brighton, when I think Liverpool can afford to be a little bit more open and expansive in that game. So there was a few bits that I didn't necessarily agree with. As you say, the sort of formation, the tactics didn't quite pull together in the way that Jurgen Klopp would have wanted. But yeah, there was a couple of surprises. But as I say, I still think they should have had enough to perform at a better level. And I don't think you can, give the players the excuse of, oh, they've not played together before, or they've come out of the blue and stuff like that. I think certainly for someone like Divock Origi, you really desperately wanted a little bit more from him. We know that he can offer a little bit more, and he just didn't quite do that. And unfortunately for Liverpool, there was just too many areas of the pitch where it just didn't quite click enough for them to get that job done.
Mark, what was your view on it?
I was certainly very surprised to see one or two players in the team. Matip, I was very surprised to see him in the starting lineup, but when I saw it, I thought, okay, give him 45 minutes, maybe bring Fabinho on at half time. That didn't happen. That surprised me even more that he played him for, about 85 minutes. I think Matip played before he came off, which was very surprising given, he is the senior centre-back at the club right now. I wasn't surprised to see Origi playing, but, he is what he is at this minute. You know what you're going to get from him. I just thought it was a classic example of I think they missed Firmino a lot in that game. There were plenty of times where, the main difference between Firmino and Origi is they'll both have the ball to feet a lot, but the link-up play that Firmino gives you, especially with the midfield and linking up with the front three players like Mane and Salah, it just wasn't there last night. There's not one you can't just pick one poor play. I think nobody had a fantastic game, like Matt said. Tsimikas didn't do great, but didn't do poorly. Same for Nico Williams, and same for Reece, and pretty much every other player on the pitch. I thought Addison was probably the best out of the lot, given a couple of saves and a couple of moments he made. But overall, it wasn't the performance you want to see. But it just seemed like a performance that just screamed that they're more bold about Brighton at the weekend than last night. And to some extent, you can agree with that. 3 wins out of 3 before that in the group. They're not qualified yet by any stretch of the imagination. No, Ajax are next week at home. That's not going to be easy. And the Midtjylland away, that's not going to be easy either. It just seemed like, certainly from a team selection point of view, but more so from a mental approach point of view, that they just seemed to fully concentrate on getting the job done at Brighton, making sure that they don't come away with any injuries, don't come away with any lasting damages mentally in terms of getting beat heavily. They just seem to play too safe for me, which again comes from, Robertson's a lot more adventurous going forward. Tsimikas hasn't quite got that confidence or ability. I think he can put a good crossing like Robertson can, but just hasn't got quite the confidence to hold his line, probably start 10 yards further forward and just starts a bit more defensive, so he's got more ground to make up. But yeah, it just seems like a bit of I'm not going to say unexpected the performance, because we've seen it before in games. I think I've mentioned it before. It screams of a performance similar to when they played Red Star Belgrade away a couple of years ago, where they just went at it at all. But the difference there was they were away from home in a hostile atmosphere. This time they're at home, albeit no crowd. But it was unexpected to see it at home. If it had been away, you would expect it more. But just at home, I know the crowd isn't there. I think if fans were there, we would have got a different performance, because the fans wouldn't have let that happen, I don't think. But it is what it is. They've got 2 more games to try and get qualified. They've got Brighton away at the weekend. They didn't come away with any injuries that we know of. So, try and look at it as positive as you can.
Substitutions baffled me, Matt, I'll be honest. I mean, you mentioned Robertson before in terms of, getting him on the pitch, not seeing him on the pitch. I wouldn't have put him on the pitch at that point. I think it's important to reference, there's a real sort of sliding doors moment in the game whereby Liverpool are waiting to bring 4 players on and Atalanta score a goal. I basically think we're 10 minutes away from everyone shaking hands on 0-0, especially Atalanta, if that's the case. If them players come on, Liverpool get a bit of a second wing, go up a gear. I think 10 minutes after that happening, I think everyone would have been sort of okay with 0-0 at that point. But they get the goal, which is fair enough. But I think, I don't know, I'm not sure about what the manager's plans and processes were. It's fine to say that he had none. It's fine to say that he was managing in game. But if you know anything about Klopp, he's all about pre-planning. He's all about sort of thinking ahead, not just in terms of the next fixture, but the next 5. And they were substitutes to me that looked like he was acting a little bit too much on instinct, if you like. At that point, I'd rather just not put Robertson on the pitch. And I get that Tsimikas maybe only had X amount of minutes in his legs from sports scientists or whatever, but yeah, like Mark says before, Matip going long into the night was also a bit strange. Yeah, you get the Salah one because he's had COVID and you sort of manage him for 60, you get him off, etc., etc. But they just felt a bit, they felt a bit sort of almost as if the manager had his chimpanzee on his shoulder, for want of a better phrase, telling him that he had to go and win the game as soon as possible, and it worked out the way it worked out.
Yeah, the fact that it was a quadruple change, wasn't it? We don't see them very often. It did feel like it was a premeditated one, but then you think, well, Robertson and Jota for a spell looked like they were going to come on at half time. I don't know whether that was the manager changing his mind or whether Liverpool were never expecting them to come on at that point in the game. It sort of was referenced in commentary on the television that Jota was getting ready, Andy Robertson was ready, and then he'd sat back down again, and it just seemed a little bit like they changed their mind on exactly when that was going to happen. But to be honest, I'm completely with you. I think if you go with Tsimikas, I think that's a decision that is okay. At left back, I think obviously at some point he's got to come in. You've got to give Andy Robertson a rest. But what they kind of did there, as you say, was almost a halfway house between giving Robertson a rest and bringing in Tsimikas, or not doing that at all. And I think if you started with Tsimikas, you have to sort of just play him for the full game, not give Robertson any minutes, just give him the entire night off. He can be on the bench, if there's an injury or something like that, he can come on. But essentially just say to him that you've got the night off, you've had a tough international break. We'll see you on Saturday. We'll use you for the Brighton game. And yeah, it was slightly strange that they chose to bring him on. I think it was less strange that, as you say, they brought off Mohamed Salah because you've got to manage his minutes after he's come back from the positive test with COVID. But yeah, the substitutions were strange. I think if you'd have said that there was going to be one premeditated change, I think, as Mark says, it would have been that you give Matip half the game and Fabinho the other half of the game. To be honest, I probably wouldn't have played Joel Matip at all, just because we know what his injury situation is like. I would have just said, well, the priority for this week is Saturday. It's not tonight. So again, Matip, like Robertson, if we're not going to take that risk, we don't do it at all. But yeah, I'm sure there was a plan from Jurgen Klopp, because that is the kind of manager that he is. We've seen that in the past. He did it, I think, was it against Midtjylland, where he makes a triple change on 60 minutes. We've seen it happen before. So there must have been some sort of thought process and plan and managing the minutes ahead of Brighton at the weekend. But yeah, it wasn't quite the way that you would expect it to come from Jurgen Klopp. And it just seemed, as you say, a little bit haphazard in the approach, which is not something that we've come to know from Klopp and his staff in recent times.
Mark, one of the sort of rebuttals to Klopp's interview last week against Leicester was the fact that Liverpool are a top side, so therefore they should have a top squad, so therefore they should be able to cope with injuries, as if people who are paid lots of money aren't supposed to have hamstrings that can be pulled. But I think that there's definitely a conversation to have around whether Liverpool's squad is in fact sort of deep and durable enough. And on paper, it's absolutely stock full of talent and brimming with players who can do a job. But when you see last night, for instance, Origi comes in from the cold. He's playing through the middle. He's very much got a brief that he doesn't fulfil. By all accounts, Ian Doyle tweeted during the game that Klopp was not happy with Minamino from the sidelines, that he could see in terms of his movement with Origi. Taki Minamino doesn't get on the pitch until 84 minutes. It's indicting on him that he doesn't start the game and Origi does. You've got other players there, Oxlade-Chamberlain, Keita, Shaqiri, Matip, as Matt's referenced. These players who aren't blessed with the greatest fitness record. And sort of where I'm going with this is, does the manager at a point have to look at this and say, well, yeah, he's got a great squad, but are the players in and around the periphery of the starting 11 reliable enough for him? And in the likes of Minamino, in his case, does he actually rate them enough to do a job? Because it seems the minute with him that he doesn't.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I mentioned before, one of the most interesting change, lack of change that I thought was Mane starting. I fully expected Minamino to play certainly from the start last night, whether it was a full game or an hour, whatever. I was very surprised not to see him in the team, and I was even more surprised when they made 4 changes that he wasn't one of them, and then he brings on Andy Robertson and Diogo Jota, who have played a lot of football over the past month or so. So, for one reason or another, Minamino, it's not quite worked at the moment. I'm still not at the point where I'm writing him off as a Liverpool player, but there certainly has got to be questions asked of him why he's not being selected as much, why he's not being given as much of a chance as likes of Jota. But in fairness to that, Jota has been in England for 3 seasons before he came to Liverpool, and Minamino's coming from the Austrian league, has got to learn everything. But you would think by what's it been, 11 months or so, you would think he would be at a point where he's challenging for a starting spot, especially when the squad is being utilised so widely as it is in these sorts of games where you want to use your fringe players more, especially with Shaqiri. I thought Shaqiri would have played yesterday had he been fit. Obviously, that would mean probably one of Mane probably wouldn't have played either. Maybe Wijnaldum given a rest, but the squad is blessed with a lot of talent. There's no doubt about it. It must be remembered. There's Oxlade-Chamberlain on the sidelines, Thiago, Henderson. In defence, you've got Gomez and Van Dijk. Up front, you've got Shaqiri. There's a lot of injuries in there, and you take what was that, half a dozen 7 players out of any squad, especially when they're as good as what these ones are. That is going to impact you. But there has got to be questions asked of me. In terms of Origi, I think we've learned by now what he brings or doesn't bring to the team. But in terms of Minamino, there certainly has got to be a question asked of what, how does Klopp use him going forward? He obviously rates him as a player. That's why he wanted to bring him to the club. He was absolutely delighted when he scored against Liverpool for Salzburg last year. So, yeah, it's getting to the point where it is a concern. But it will certainly be. I don't expect him to play against Brighton, but it'd be interesting to see whether he gets a game against Ajax. Personally, after last night, I don't think he will, because there's a lot more on this game now that Liverpool have lost. But yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting thing going forward.
Are we being unfair in a way, Matt? Am I being unfair in the sense that you've got Klopp, who's as we've spoken about, he's very sort of pragmatic in his managerial approach, more so than people actually realise. They sort of associate him with the gegenpress, with the heavy metal football, but he's more conservative than people think. He's got his starting 11. He's got his sort of 14 or 15 that he goes to. Is it hard to be a player on the periphery of this Liverpool side who can sort of come in out of the cold, play with the same intensity and not sort of be at risk to injury? Is it going to happen? Is it something that we just have to deal with, do you think?
It's a really difficult one, isn't it? I think Liverpool going into the season, I don't think many people would have had too many concerns. I think Liverpool have been obviously very, very unfortunate with injuries. I think, for example, if Virgil van Dijk isn't injured and Van Dijk plays yesterday, I'm not sure either of those 2 goals that Atalanta score happen. I think Van Dijk would have positioned the defence in a better way. I think the midfield, as a result of him being there, would have been slightly further forward. And there's not really too much that Jurgen Klopp can do about the fact that Van Dijk is out for a period of time. You can't just buy another Van Dijk in anticipation of Van Dijk getting injured. I think it's very difficult for him to balance. He's always been a manager who wants to work with a small squad, as you reference. Obviously, the size of the squad this season is slightly larger in anticipation of there being so many matches. But if Liverpool, towards the end of this season, for instance, get a few of these players who are out injured, Shaqiri, Henderson, Thiago, if in January a few of these players are back fit again, suddenly we're looking at this Liverpool squad in a very different way. And suddenly you're looking and saying, well, Minamino for some of these Premier League games might not even get on the bench if Shaqiri is fit and in form. If there's a few other players in different positions who you could say a similar sort of thing about. So I just think at this moment in time, it maybe looks worse than it is. It's a situation where Liverpool could not have anticipated being this decimated by injuries, all in certain positions, all at the same time. So I think possibly in 4 to 6 weeks' time, we could look at it in a very different way. So I think it would be a little bit harsh, I think, to sort of criticise them in that regard for their squad, because apart from at centre-back, I don't think anybody was really saying that going into the season.
Yeah, and you can check out a piece that Mark's writing about that Takumi Minamino situation on Liverpool.com. That'll be out later today. As will another piece that me and Mark are deliberating on, and we're going to sort of have 10 minutes of fun with that now. It's about players' contracts, and specifically players who expire in 2023. We had a look this morning, and there's some tasty names of Liverpool players whose contracts expired in 2023. So we've decided to go through them individually and ask the question to each other: would you give them a deal this summer? Based on a variance of situations and circumstances, we wanted an answer that will be up on the site later. So I'm going to go through not one each, but I'll go through sort of a player and then get one of your opinion, and then we'll move on as not to spoil the piece entirely. So Mark, I'll start with you. And one of the players that was sort of more difficult for me to make a decision than I thought was Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. He is 27, so he'll be approaching 30 come 2023. Injuries, as we know. But would you give him a deal or not this summer?
I think, like you, I think I had quite an issue trying to decide which way to go on this. As a player and as a person as well, I'm a massive fan of him. I think he's a brilliant player to watch. I think he's arguably one of the most useful players to have in the squad when fully fit, purely because he can operate pretty much almost anywhere on the pitch. Certainly on the right-hand side, on the wing, even at right back. We saw him at Arsenal briefly, but that's probably not a situation Klopp wants to do too often. But certainly midfield, there's a lot of options there that you can do with him. But, you know, the one thing that worries me with him is his fitness and injury record. You know, the one that the ACL that he got obviously was, you know, a massive piece of bad luck on his part. And he battled back and came back well from injury. But ever since then, he just keeps getting the odd little injury every now and then he's been injured pretty much since pre-season. It just worries me when a player keeps getting injured or suffers a bad injury. They just keep reoccurring. Maybe every now and then they can't go at full pelt as they once could. It's not something I enjoy thinking, but I personally wouldn't give him a new deal. But it all depends on whether he can stay fit between now and 2023, which is a very, very long time.
Okay. Matt, Xherdan Shaqiri, he's 29 now. He is out of contract in 2023. This is one of the easier ones for me. What would you do with Xherdan Shaqiri this summer?
Well, I think first and foremost, the answer for all of these is you either give them a new deal or you look to sell them next summer, I think, because you don't want to be getting into the final year of the contract. We've seen the issue with someone.
You know, I don't know. I'll argue the point with you on one of them.
Yeah, we've seen the issue with Gini Wijnaldum and various others. I don't think Liverpool can afford to let something similar with one or two of the bigger names on this list happen. Not suggesting that they will, but in terms of Shaqiri, I would not offer him a new deal. I think he's at an age where, you know, you would be looking to move him on before that point. Liverpool had set a price this summer. They wanted £28 million for him. Obviously, COVID changed that. Nobody was prepared to come in for him. There was a couple of teams. I think Roma was one of them. I think Sevilla was one of them as well that would have potentially come in and signed him this summer. So this is a fairly straightforward one, I think, not just because of the age, but the fact that Liverpool essentially were happy to let Xherdan Shaqiri go this summer suggests that probably if he doesn't, you know, continue to stay fit, or he doesn't make himself an even more crucial part of this team between now and the end of the season, it might be one that we see get sold next summer. So yeah, no new contract for me for Xherdan Shaqiri. I think he'll be probably long gone by 2023.
All right, I'll do the next one. Roberto Firmino. And just to sort of counter Matt's point in a way, I would not give Roberto Firmino a contract this summer, but I would not sell him either. I think that come 2023, the player will be over 30. Not sure of his exact age. I haven't got it in front of me. In fact, I'll have a quick look while we're on. So he will turn 30 this summer in June So, we'll be looking at 32 come the end of his deal. And I think we're already getting signs that Firmino is physically very slowly feeling the effects of his last 5 years at Liverpool. And I don't think that's, I don't think that's a criticism of him. I don't think that's an unfair statement to make. I think it's just general wear and tear because he's been such a good player and he's been so durable. So I think I would actually favour a Wijnaldum type situation with Firmino, whereby we run his deal down and we all shake hands on what an unbelievable servant he's been to this club at the age in which I think it's probably right that he leaves the club. So I'd be doing nothing with him, but I wouldn't be giving him a new contract either. Mark, I'll come back around to you. Naby Keita is a very interesting case in point. He is, at the moment, contracted to 2023. He's 25 years of age. He'll turn 26 in February, and his contract ends on the 30th of June. What would you do with him?
Well, this is going to be the first time I actually would award a new contract to somebody, given that we've just had a stream of no's go their way. But no, there's just something about Keita that I really, really like. The one thing that to some extent, I'm going to counteract my point I made about Oxlade-Chamberlain is that he has had a number of injuries, probably more than Oxlade-Chamberlain as well. But there's just something about him when he's at his best. He's just a joy to watch. I think against Leicester is the most recent example. He was the best player on the pitch before he came off injured after 50 minutes easily. And when he does that, I just think he can dictate the way a game flows. Whether if it's a high tempo game, he can play that game. If it's a bit slow and trying to break a team down, he can do that as well. But he's just he just epitomizes everything Klopp is about in terms of the way he leads the press. He can pretty much do anything you want in midfield, attack, defence, or as just a regular box-to-box. So, purely is a bit younger than Oxlade-Chamberlain. By the time his contract runs out, he'll be 28, I think, by the time he gets there. So, he probably will have a couple more years left at the top, fitness providing. But, yeah, for those few reasons, for the fact that he is can be just so magical to watch when he's at his best, albeit not too often in a Liverpool shirt so far, but the potential there for me is enough to give him a new deal.
I just realised we've missed one out in Fabinho, Mark, so we'll have to update the piece before that goes out. I'll hand that over to you, Matt. Fabinho, 27 now, 3 years left on his deal, turns 28 in October. What would you be doing there?
Yeah, I think you would offer him a new contract. I think he's probably, for me, as much as we've seen him at centre-back, he's probably the best holding midfielder in the Premier League at this moment in time. I think he's a much more mobile and sort of energetic midfielder than a lot of people give him credit for. I think he's sort of quite a tall, rangy type player. Sometimes you don't quite realise how mobile he can actually be at the base of that midfield. But yeah, for me, I think you would definitely tie him down, partly because of his age, partly because of the attributes that he's got. And yeah, I think he can certainly be a big part of this Liverpool team going forward. So I think he'd be a very, very difficult player to replace. I think Liverpool spent a long time trying to find that perfect person to sit in front of the defence. I think obviously other players can do it. Wijnaldum can do it. Henderson can do it. But I don't think either of them can do it quite to the same level of Fabinho. And of course, he comes with the extra thing of being able to play at centre-back, probably play him at right-back as well as he has done in the past. So I think he's too valuable a player to let go. And for me, there's no doubt that you would offer him a new deal.
All right, it's about to get very tasty indeed. I'll go next. Sadio Mane is the no-brainer for me, and he's 28 years of age now. He'll be 29 in June. That means it'll take him to 31. I think he's durable. I think he's fit. I think he has the ability to use his brain and his game intelligence to play in a manner of positions later on in his career. I don't think he's reliant on his pace, but I also don't see him overly sort of losing his pace, although he may lose his explosivity with times. I think Mane for me is one Liverpool need to nail down. I think he's He's shown that he's, in tip-top condition physically. I think he's a player who, like I said, with his back to goal, for example, in front of goal, I think he's shown that he can maybe be a centre forward. He can move more centrally with time. So I think getting him nailed down on a deal this summer would be a priority for me. That's Sadio Mane. Mark, I'll hand you over similarly, age profile, position to Mohamed Salah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one because, certainly in my lifetime, he is one of the best players I've ever seen in a Liverpool shirt. I think he's just come up with some of the most magical moments you could ever wish to see on a football pitch, certainly at Anfield. But, like I say, what age will he be when he comes 2023? He's 31, 32, round about that age. Unlike Mane, I think Salah is a bit reliant on his pace. Running between the lines, obviously on counter attacks, he's obviously one of the most devastating players in world football in those situations. And as much as we don't want it to happen, is going to come a time when he just loses half a yard in pace, and that will quite impactfully affect his game, whether we want it to or not. He's got 3 years left on his deal, 2.5 years left on his deal. Whether to go back to Matt's point of, if you're not going to offer them a deal, would you sell them in the summer or look to sell them? I wouldn't go that far, but me personally, I wouldn't offer him a new deal.
Okay, couple more to get through. Matt, I'm going to give you the ultimate sticky one to digest. Virgil van Dijk. This isn't as easy as people think, and I think it's interesting that he hasn't signed a deal yet since he joined the club. But he's 29 now. He's got a massive injury. And he's 2 years left on his deal in the summer. What would you do there?
Yeah, I mean, the injury is a sticking point for me because you never quite know, is he going to come back the exact same player? If he does come back and he's the same player, which there's a chance that will be the case, and obviously everyone hopes that is the case, I think it becomes a lot easier. Obviously, the centre-backs can play at their peak for a lot longer than outfield players. I think the conversation around Van Dijk's age is slightly different, for example, to someone like Roberto Firmino, who is at a similar sort of age at this moment in time. We're talking about them in slightly different ways. I think, for me, Van Dijk is good enough that you would keep him about. I think, for me, there's no doubt that, again, you do offer him that new deal. But the only thing in the back of my mind is that injury. I think Liverpool have got to a situation where they've been very reliant on him for the last couple of seasons. I think as much as anything else, you don't want to ever have to replace him. You will have to replace him at some point, but I would rather Liverpool replaced these key players in stages. And I think you can keep Virgil van Dijk, injury permitting, longer than you can keep Mane, Salah, players like that. So I think you try and replace in the next 2 or 3 years Mane and Salah long term. Once you've got that boxed off, you then try and replace Van Dijk. So yeah, for me, he gets a new contract, and I think if he can come back, and there's no guarantee of this, but if he can come back, make his recovery before the end of this season, play a couple of games at the latter end of this season, I think probably we see a new contract almost as a reward for that, getting over the injury, probably next summer.
Okay, last one. We'll go around the room very quickly on, and then we'll finish up. The captain, Jordan Henderson. I'll start. I would say no, don't give him a contract this summer, but I would say eventually over the course of the next 2 summers, you give him a 2-year deal. There's 2 questions you have to answer with Henderson. A, what he wants to do in his future, and therefore does he have a future at Liverpool beyond just playing? And B, how long can he actually play for? I think if you make the argument that he can play until he's 35, not at this level, but he can do a James Milner type job, then you get him on a 2-year deal as and when his contract expires in 2023. If you don't think that, he's someone who can go into coaching or can play and that time might actually just creep up on him quicker than others, then I think you maybe need to shake hands on the current contract when it expires then. But for me, I'd be looking to give him a 2-year deal around the time of expiry of his current one. Mark, what would you do?
I think I'd probably echo the same view as you. I think given what he's given to the club, given the amount of time he's given to the club, I mean, it'll be think 2023 will be 12 years they'll have given to the club by the time that comes around. That's a really, really long time. Not many players go that long. So I think by the time that comes around, I think he'll have earned the right to do pretty much whatever he wants, whether it's leave on a free, whether it's go off and sign for another club in another country, another league, whatever that may be. Me personally, I want to see him at the club for as long as possible, but in terms of offering a new deal this summer, I wouldn't offer him one this summer, but I think I would do something like they've done with James Milner, get close to the end and then look at his fitness levels, look at what he wants to do, and then offer him a 1 or 2 year extension. That would be the way I'd do it. But yeah, just keeping it at the club as long as possible, for me personally.
Matt, any different thoughts?
I think James Milner is the example that you've got to follow. I think Jordan Henderson is far too valuable for this Liverpool team, even if you have to over time limit the matches that he plays. For him not to be around, I think would be a mistake. So I think you probably, if not this summer coming up, at some point you offer him a sort of rolling contract, because I can see him wanting to finish his career at Liverpool. I think if he does want to go somewhere else, absolutely, he's earned the right to do that. But yeah, I can certainly see a situation where he probably goes on a little bit longer than maybe people think. I think maybe he becomes this James Milner sort of person where, even in the sense that he might have to fill in a game or two at right back at certain times. He might have to play in midfield. He might have to adapt the way that he plays. But I think he's going to be one of those that can be really, really useful off the pitch as much as on it. So yeah, I think you keep him around. I think you work out from his perspective, what does he want to do next? If he wants to be a coach, do the coaching badges, do that sort of thing, whilst being at Liverpool, and just see where you go. But yeah, there's no doubt for me that Jordan Henderson is still hugely valuable, and that he still will be in a few years' time as well. So yeah, follow the James Milner example and keep him rolling over at Liverpool.
All right, huge thank you to Matt and to Mark. Check out liverpool.com for those pieces we mentioned and tons more. We'll be looking ahead to Brighton. We will be burying the ghost of Atalanta as soon as possible, as will this Liverpool team and manager, we hope. In the meantime, stay safe, and let's all look forward to some fans getting back into Anfield very soon.